Welcome to the Indiana History Project. I'm your co-host, Norm Taylor. Welcome back to the second show on the history of moonshine in southern Indiana. Thank you, folks out there. The response to the first show was just overwhelming, and I appreciate everybody that has been calling me, that has been emailing me, sending me all the great stories that you've been giving me. I'm going to use a lot of them on a future show, and I do appreciate it, and I encourage you just to keep sending them in. You can still go to the Indiana History Project. You like it on Facebook, and you can send it through there, or the information at the end of the show. You can email me. You can give me a phone call, but we still want to hear the stories, because what this show is about is to preserve these great stories on moonshining, and there have been a bunch of them. And I appreciate that the community has been getting involved with this and enjoying it. Randy, my co-host, my buddy, my friend, and historian, is back with me today. Randy, it was a fun show, that first one.
You know, I just watched it again this morning, Norm. It was such a good show that I thought it deserved another viewing, and boy, it sure did. We had some good stories there, and Ron was a great guest.
He was a great guest.
Having him on here.
I had a guy that came up, approached me just the other day, and he said, "Hey, that place that you were showing us there in Martin County, hey, I visited that myself." And so he said, "That's true." He said, "But I didn't know it was still there." Well, there wasn't much of it left there. Not much of it. But that was a great story. Left the moonshine and hiding it from his wife, I believe, and put it in the glove box, and boy, and it exploded. You don't put that kind of moonshine in the depth of the summertime, do you?
No, not in southern Indiana.
That's asking for trouble.
That it is.
Folks,
that's like napalm bomb there.
It is at that. We have some great stories that is going to be coming your way today, and I wanted to make sure that we had shows in which we told the story about moonshine and the great, and some of them very funny, hilarious stories. I mean, I've got to know a cast of characters through my study of moonshine, and you're going to get to know them in these next few shows. Well, I've got a cast of characters here today, and that right here are living examples. Well, Randy, thanks for coming back.
I appreciate it.
And we're going to do this again, at least another show, maybe 4, because we've got a lot of material to go through. Randy, a little bit later on, is going to be talking about the NASCAR connection with moonshine, and I'm going to look forward to that myself. Well, right next to Randy is a young man. I mean, just full of energy and spry and getting younger by the moment. Isn't that right, Kenny?
Yeah, years talent. It's your show.
Okay.
There's some things you just don't argue with. That's one of
those. Kenny Dalton. I mean, I guess probably about everybody knows Kenny from being a barber in the area. How many years, Kenny?
Right at 50.
50 years?
Almost.
I'm the only person that I guess didn't know Kenny in town, because, well, when you look at the back of my head, you'll see why. I never visited Kenny, but Kenny, you know, I used to go to a barber on 4th Street. Let's see if you can remember him. His name was Charlie Lancaster.
Yeah.
Do you happen to remember him?
Yep, had a lot of his tools and stuff out of his shop, and antique in the back of my shop.
Is that right?
Of course, I knew Charlie. He was probably 80 whenever I started in Bedford.
Is that right?
Pretty close, yeah.
He was a fantastic guy. He used to do Charlie Weaver. Now, some of my people out there, they may not remember Charlie Weaver, but he was a comedian back, years ago, and he would just do a great impression of him. But boy, whenever Charlie would put me in a chair, and he would tell me the stories. He said, "Now listen, son," and I was young, and he'd have to put me on a board, there, and he said, "Now listen, son, I've only cut off 2 ears in my whole practice of being a barber, from those that just were squirming too much." But he said, I just don't want to do a third. And boy, that kept me in that chair locked in pretty well. Yeah. I know you probably had some squirrely ones yourself every once in a while.
Some dandies.
Yeah, but Charlie was a great guy. He talked about fighting in the Great War. And when I was a little kid, I thought he was talking about World War II, but it wasn't. It was World War I. He was actually a World War I veteran. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but a fantastic guy.
He had a young barber there with him. It was Ray Harrell, was my class of school.
Another fine guy.
Ray was twins.
Yeah. Ray, and I just talked to his son just last night, in fact, and Ray was another good one that was right there on 4th Street, and 2 fine people. And this one, the Jiggs, Sherrill is with us again. Jiggs, thanks for coming back.
You're welcome. I'm glad that this is
It's
brings
something
back
you know
a lot.
something about, huh?
It's bringing back a lot of good memories.
Okay, good. I'm looking forward to hearing from Kenny and Jiggs on some great stories. If Jiggs looks familiar, sometime back, him and Cocky Holmes was on my program, World War II veterans, and with Lee Hutchison, and well, I had a lot of great response to that. Did anybody ever say they saw you on that program, Jiggs?
Several.
Yeah, well, it was fun. It was one of those shows that all I had to do is just talk a little bit and then just gave it to Cocky and Jiggs, and they fought over who was going to say what. So I could just take a nap. And but Jiggs, good to have you back.
Thank you.
And this is going to be a fun one. And Jiggs, you knew about this because you watched my first show. Then you knew that we were doing this subject then.
Right.
And he
Yeah.
contacted me and said, I've got some moonshine stories on it. And so since I knew Jiggs, I said, Jiggs, come on. And it's with Kenny. And he said, well, if it's Kenny, I don't want to come on. But no, he didn't say that. But he's back. So we're going to hear some great stories from them. I have admired, I met him one time, a long time ago, but the Lawrence County historian James Guthrie. What a valuable work and service he did for our community in preserving Lawrence County history. And he was just a great man. One of the two books that he wrote on Lawrence County, A Quarter Century of Lawrence County History, I've referred to actually both of them several times. But when it got to moonshine, he wrote actually quite a bit. And I wanted to read some of what James Guthrie said because he had some great stories in the quarter century of Lawrence County history. Sometimes moonshiners and bootleggers just didn't have good days. I guess like the rest of us, you have some good days and bad days. James Guthrie talked about some of the bad days that moonshiners had. And but not only were the bad days, but just some of them were just downright hilarious, as I've read this and I've laughed about some of the stories. James said small-time bootleggers who often did business out of their homes, and there was a lot of that in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, were sometimes very amusing. In October of 1927, federal prohibition officers swept into the county and arrested 24 operators of joints which dispensed liquid damnation. The culprits were all sent to the penal farm by automobile and left town merrily singing, "We're bound for the Bootleggers Convention," led by Roy Norgan. Well, Louise Gill was caught in that sting operation as well. She changed her plea from guilty to innocent before the judge 9 times before accepting her punishment finally. When being raided, Mr. Guthrie would say bootleggers were desperately trying to destroy the evidence, often grabbing bottles from officers' hands and smashing them. Many kept vinegar even close by to hurriedly pour it into the liquor. Well, sometimes that didn't work. Frank Bundy's place was raided in Inglewood, and he broke a gallon bottle of moonshine, but one of the officers put a rag in the residue and soaked up enough evidence to get him convicted. George Schramm buried his liquor underground on a hill, and he would run a siphon hose from the establishment to get to his drinks. Can you imagine? Well,
Pretty smart.
You know, whenever I started thinking about how you're going to hide all the smoke out into the woods, you know, from these revenuers that were looking for you, and then I read where a lot of times they had hose that was put underground and it would come up through the water to dispose of. They became pretty ingenious in that. We're going to talk about some of that, the hiding techniques a little bit later. Ex-Bedford police officer Com Morse was arrested on bootlegging charges, fined and given a 90-day sentence, but took to his heels and escaped from the police court. Well, they went in pursuit. He was located sitting in a cherry tree in Green Hill Cemetery, contemplating his fate, and said he did not like the outlook concerning his penal farm sentence in company with those that he helped put in there. Well, he went nevertheless. Ex-Sheriff John Payton related someone tipped Mayor Johnston that booze could be purchased at the North End Fire Station. Now, that's still there, guys, the North End Fire Station. And sure enough, they sent an undercover man to the North End Fire Station, and it was true. They could. In September of 29, oh, by the way, they fired all the firemen. In September 29, Stanley Torfey was located above Kennedy's Barbershop. Have you ever heard of that one?
Yeah.
Where was Kennedy's Barbershop?
Well, it was in two locations. It was right in the middle of the square where the city courts and stuff is at one time, and then they moved down between the railroad track and the city hall.
Okay.
On the south side of
on the south side. This is where this happened in 1929. Okay, Kennedy's Barbershop.
Big
Sure remember that. Okay.
Big two-story building.
Okay. Okay, he was located above Kennedy's Barbershop on the south side of the square and put up with raid after raid. He then had a 3-inch thick oak door built to protect his premises on there, but Captain Cecil Brock chopped it down. The delay gave Torfey ample time, though, to pour the evidence down the drain. Judge Cox ordered the place padlocked. Mrs. Harry Holler of Edgewood had several gallons of whiskey underneath her house. The jug bottoms firmly set in concrete, and the mouths extending to the floor above with nicely varnished corks flush with the floor for concealment. But raiders came anyway, and spotting the deception, arrested her. Well, they also found it concealed in her furniture. She dug out some places there and hid it in her furniture and her couches. They found liquor even hidden on the roof and even in the roof gutters in Mrs. Lehman Lessig's home, and she attempted to pour the whiskey out but could not get the whiskey poured out in time. When Cecil Brock picked up a glass containing whiskey, Mrs. Lessig feigned a heart attack, then threatened to take poison. But she was arrested anyway. Floyd Bennett, not knowing his officials, tried to sell Sheriff Tyree a bottle in the courthouse and was promptly marched to jail. Well, the sheriff found the bottle in Lester Hall, jailed him for 5 hours, but then discovered the bottle contained prescription medicine. Well, Hall was a teetotaler, and so he got out of it. John Matlock's chicken house floor gave up a large quantity of rot gut. An older friend of the writer stated it was possible, even at this time, to open up a basement window in a certain downtown church, hand in money, and withdraw a bottle of booze, all without seeing the seller. It seemed to be everywhere. In fact, one story I heard is in Leesville, gentlemen, that a car pulled up around the late 20s and pulled up and they said, "Can we buy moonshine in this area?" Some gentleman sitting out there on one of the front porches there, one establishment, pointed over at a church. And he said, "You mean I can buy wood or moonshine there?" He said, "No, sir, that's the only place you can't buy it."
That's church.
One more story, and then we're going to get into some others. And I like this one. This one was Frank Leo Lockhart. Well, he experienced a bad day when his 75-gallon cooker, that's a big one, blew up in the home at 5th and Frank Streets in Mitchell. These tended to do that every once in a while. I guess that alerted people to it.
I think the hole's still there. I think it's still there.
Is it right?
Yeah, it might be.
Okay, it could still be there on 5th and Frank Street in Mitchell. It says he was one of the best steals ever found in the Mitchell area up to that time, and 25 gallons of its product remained as evidence. After his trial, in which he was handed a 1 to 5 year sentence, Lockhart bolted from the courtroom, and his wife, who had been present when the steel exploded, was sentenced to prison in his stead. So Lockhart got out, but since his wife here, they just went ahead and arrested her. On learning of that, though, Lockhart surrendered and said that the shock of the prison sentence momentarily stunned him. But he came back to help his wife out. So Mr. Lockhart went still. These are just some of the stories.
One of the stories I was reading was that the Moonshiners were notoriously honest because they really didn't consider what they were doing to be really illegal. You know, they said, you know, it might be a law, but I really don't see any reason it should be. And these guys would get convicted, and the judge would let them go and tell them the prison bus is going to be here about noon on Tuesday. Y'all just need to come on back. Yeah. And he just let them go. And they'd come back and get on the bus, and they'd go to prison.
Yeah.
They were notoriously honest because they really didn't believe what I'm doing should be illegal. That you have no right to tax something that I'm making in my own home. You have no right to tax that. That's mine. I did that.
Well, whenever I read the one story about them just pouring them in, put them in automobiles and taking them off, and they were all singing out the windows, "We're going to the Bootleggers Convention." It's hard to believe that you would be transporting prisoners just in automobiles back then, but evidently, like what you're saying is true.
Yeah.
I got thinking about, and people have been asking me so many questions already about moonshine, the terminology used, and I wanted to address that because there's just too many to write everybody back. I would like to do that, but some person asked me, what does the triple X's mean on the jug? Any of you guys, I've got the answer to that, but you see the famous showing that the old jug with a triple X on it. Well, I did a little research on that, what that meant, and I found out that this was moonshine that had been run through the still 3 times. In fact, if there was 3 X's on that jug, that was pretty much pure alcohol. That had a kick to it. And I found out in doing a little bit of research now that if you can find a jug with 3 X's on it, it is highly collectible.
Yeah.
The people pay big money because there's not hardly any left. It's that rare now to find an old moonshine jug with 3 X's on it. But if you've got one, you've actually got some money because there are collectors out there. Put it on eBay because there are people out there that are looking for it. People ask, where was the biggest moonshine area at? And I found out that probably, and it's known for that, Franklin County, Virginia, has been known to be the moonshine capital of the world. That during the Prohibition time, there were actually 3,900 stills that were destroyed during that time.
That's pretty good number.
3,900 during Prohibition. And they said there was only 100 people living in near Rocky Mount, Virginia during that time. There was only 100, but local policemen said 99 out of the 100 were involved with making moonshine. And in fact, until just a few years ago, and I was just recently on the East Coast, but a feed store in Rocky Mount, the size of about a Volitic, a little over 1,000, was the single largest distributor of sugar on the whole East Coast. Yeah. Folks, remember, this is a feed store.
Yeah.
It's not in a grocery store. And remember that New York City's on the East Coast. Little Rocky Mount. Still, to this day, and it's still pretty popular. If some people say, well, what is the definition? What's the difference between if a person is a moonshiner and a bootlegger? Anybody want to answer that one? I've got it. But
well, you've also got the rum runners. The rum runners were the higher class, the higher tone people. They would buy the rum that was supposedly safer. And, the moonshine, well, the moonshine always had that problem with lead. And that lead in the moonshine had killed people. So the richer people, they'd buy the more expensive stuff, and they were the rum runners. The rum runners never liked to be called moonshiners because that was derogatory. That's below me. Yeah. I'm not some dang moonshiner. I'm a rum runner. I'm high tone.
Okay.
It's whether you was making it or marking it. The marketer was the bootlegger, and the moonshiner was the manufacturer or the maker.
Right, that's exactly right. There's the difference, guys. So, see, I've got a panel of moonshine experts up here. But the moonshiners, they were the ones that made it. And then the bootleggers were the ones that ran it. Right. They distributed it. And I understand that maybe it came from that back out west when they were distributing the illegal substance at one time, that they would stick it down into their boots. I've understood at times they would hide the liquid substance in their boots, and that's maybe where they came up with bootlegger. Not for sure, but that's one possible reason. Okay, what about then a rum runner? And I understand that Randy, that is certainly part of it. I understand that rum runners, that higher class part, they would even ship it by sea. They were talking about that it could be even shipped by sea, the rum runners.
They would also the rum runners would actually use trains to transport it. They would dig down into the coal bins, and they'd bury it down in the coal bin, and then whenever it got to where it was going, well, it'd be a while before they got to that last train. They'd get on there and dig it back out, and that way they didn't have to run it themselves from county to county. They just let the trains do it.
Yeah, it was transported by train quite a bit, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. But what about creeks? And they used the creeks around here. I had a person that was familiar with moonshining. He said that Leatherwood Creek was a place that they used to ship moonshining down that creek. Salt Creek was shipped down it. It was White River. All of that was trailways of getting the moonshine down. If you went to a speakeasy, gentlemen, have you ever heard the term speakeasies? Well, what was a speakeasy?
We called them roadhouses, didn't we, Ken?
Okay, a roadhouse? Yeah. A roadhouse, or I've heard some people call it a blind pig or a blind tiger. Speakeasies were very popular back in the Prohibition era. Basically, it was a place, gentlemen, wasn't it, that you sold illegal liquor. And there were a few of them out there.
Oh, yeah.
Mostly roadhouses, like Jiggs said. Out East 50, out Old 37, they had roadhouses. But you had to bring your own, supposedly.
Oh, you did?
And then they'd party.
Okay.
There was 4 between here and Shady Springs.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to ask you guys, did you guys know where any speakeasies or roadhouses or blind pigs, where they were at?
No, when I was old enough,
They were already gone by then, probably.
everything had to go to city limits. And that put all of them out of business real quick.
Did you
I
know
heard
where?
a lot of stories, though.
Yeah. Did you know, Jiggs? Did you hear where anywhere that we're at? Any speakeasies?
I was too young to buy, but I've been thrown out of a lot of them. I know a friend of mine that was killed in the land of the Philippines. I'm not going to. Well, he's been dead here, but I know we were took out there by a few of the older boys, and John, the guy that run the Maple Leaf.
Yeah.
And that's it on 50 in the junction of you can go to Shawswick one way or Heltonville the other way, and that's it right there.
Oh, right there at the corner.
And of course, we didn't realize we was going to be thrown out. We might have not went in. I don't know, but, but that was man strong enough that he picked us up and threw us out the front door across the porch, and we landed in a hedge. It might have killed us if we hadn't had the hedge. He knew what he was doing.
The Brown boys are pretty good sized boys, wasn't they?
And he was beat to death by a friend of mine lately, the guy that throwed me out.
Wow. My goodness,
You
that
know
was a
who I
rough
mean?
place.
And you know who I mean?
Yeah.
And
I cut a lot of those guys' hair. There's older guys when I started in business, but cut a lot of their hair. And they'd tell you all them stories. And they was true. Shady Springs, you know where the campground is at Shady Springs out East 50?
Yeah.
No, that was a roadhouse there.
Okay.
So it got converted, so it's okay now.
Oh, okay. So it's a free spirit campground now or something like that.
It is spirit. They really get spirit
Okay.
filled, but not with the
Used to be a
moonshine.
roadhouse there.
Yes.
Okay. So there was one at Shawswick. There was one there. Any other place you guys can think of?
well, Shady Springs was a little farther on out.
Yes,
There was two between there and Maple Leaf. And both of them had cabins. One of them, Scott's, has a place there now that he sells used desks and things you've seen out here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, out
His
there by
boys
446.
play at Tunnelton.
Yeah, it's just back here.
They weren't moonshiners, but that was where one of them was at. And they had cabins there that you could rent for 2 hours for $2 for quickie things. And they sold booze, and they finally closed. There was 2 people died there in 2 different cabins.
Yeah.
From the gas. This burners didn't work. The people that was operating them, they weren't interested in that, And,
Now, were there a lot of people at that one you got thrown out of? Do you remember if were there people in there?
Yeah, lots of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The older people were there, but us kids were kind of screened out. You know? And I remember being over at the first one across from the White River Bridge on the old 37. What did they call it? The Red Cross is right across the street.
Ratapast Cresthaven on the right.
Okay.
I can't come up with a name, and it's
That's where John Dillinger would stop on his way to French Lick.
Oh.
Okay. Now, where was that located again there?
Right across from Cresthaven, he says.
Right across from Cresthaven.
Yeah, what do they call that little?
Terry Park.
Huh?
Terry Park.
Terry Park.
Terry Park.
Yeah.
And I heard
was
a
in
lot
there
of stories
one night.
about that, and some of the older guys, and I knew the bouncer that helped work there, and they bragged about that was the claim to fame. John Dillinger was stopped there and drink with them, go ahead French lick.
Wow.
Is that right?
And,
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I was in there one night when I wasn't old enough to be, and I can name the man that bit the other man's ear off in the fight.
I heard about that.
I won't name him, but I was 14 or 15, but
Wow.
big for my age.
Yeah.
And I've been in there. They used to draw straws to see who hit the first man to come in the door.
Yeah.
These were pretty rough places.
Well, they said they'd holler fight, but didn't no matter who it was. You just pick up a bottle and start beating someone over the head, or you get under the table. So it didn't matter. So they just holler fight and it'd start.
The next one down the road then would have been the Green Lantern.
Yeah.
And it was about as tough as any of them.
Where was that at there, Jiggs?
Just on 50. I mean, on Highway 37, old 37, runs in front of Crest Haven Funeral Home, which my grandson and son owns now. You go on past it on the right just before it makes its into new 37. It's there on the right.
Yeah.
Does that sound right?
Yeah.
And that was a pretty rough place, the Green Lantern.
Oh, yeah, it was. They were all tough places. You went there for one thing, for quick loving or a good fight. And, you know, I remember, well, there again, trying to keep him down with his name, but I know he thought he'd come in there one night and he'd seen 4 brothers. One of them was a state trooper later, and they were all tough boys. And he seen them leave, so he thought, well, he'd go in and he'd get in that crowd, the first man to come in the door. Well, the O'Brien boys. Anyway, the boys that left came right back in, and he said he just started to hit him, and he was hit himself and drove a slur through the screen door, across the counter, and fell in behind it. And this guy was on the Bedford Fire Department till he retired, the one that got hit. He was a big boy, and but he said the boy that hit him and his brother both jumped across the counter and lit right on top of him.
Yeah.
Said he took their shoe and moved his head back and forth, and said one of them said, "I think the damn guy's just playing possum." He said, "Oh, the other stuff, he's that smart, just leave him alone."
Okay.
A little bit of that liquid courage there, Norm.
Yeah, I think so.
Of course, that stuff back then. I mean, the potency of that stuff. There's not much on the market that's even close to as potent as the stuff they were drinking in those places.
Well, what he was talking about, the time he got the 3X's,
Yeah,
it'd been run through 3 times, so what, 180 proof or something?
Yeah, 90%
Yeah.
alcohol.
Yeah.
And
stuff like that'll get a man going pretty quick.
Pretty quick, yeah. Even the hardened ones, it would.
You could take when I was a kid, if you took that glass right there, and if you took that a third full, you was drunk before you took it away from your hand.
Okay.
Wow.
So we learned to leave it alone. You had to.
Yeah.
Home brew was different. Everybody made home brew.
Mm-hmm.
They're on 5th and W Street where the new school is. You walk from there to Old Lydic, there's just one building between Bedford and Old Lydic, and that was the Free Methodist Church had a prayer cabin there where the ballpark's at.
I'd heard about that.
And that's the only building. And
Yeah.
so there's plenty of places
Oh yeah.
to have these things. And
Yeah.
I know one boy was killed there one time, and the other one shot him when he was about 9 or 10 years old. And
Wow.
2nd or 3rd graders, and hit him there right next to where we went. If we wanted to pick up home brew, we knew where there was a spring there. It was ice cold all the time.
Yeah.
And they had a fruit jar where you could drop your money in, and it was nothing, nothing big, but
Yeah, that's what we want to make sure we get into, like what you're mentioning there, how some of the transactions was made. That's been kind of interesting itself.
well, this was I knew the old man. We milked his cow for him when I was a kid. We picked berries there, and I know Morrill Tucker, a boy that was on the fire department later. Charlie and I worked at Doolin's Donut Shop when we were 10 and 11, 12 years old. And if you went to pick berries, we'd sell these berries. Most of the time we used them for our family. But if we had any extra, we could sell them to these guys that were making wines.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I know they bought a new bull that we didn't know, and we got there before daylight, Morrill Tucker and I. And anyway, we were still in that tree at dark that night. We couldn't get out of that tree. every time that we tried to get down, the bull would hit the tree. Tree wasn't that big around, you know. And
Not a very big tree before you guys got there.
But that old man had that till he died, you know.
Wow.
But
how'd you finally get out of that tree, Jiggs?
Just waited till that bull went home. The only way. Both of us got a good whipping because they thought we were out in the swimming hole all day. We left with a berry pick bucket, and of course we dropped the buckets when we went up the tree. We hadn't got started picking berries, so we couldn't make them believe that we'd went berry picking. They thought we'd been in the billback quarry hole all day.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you got out of the tree, Jiggs.
Hell, I was thankful to you.
Well, indeed, what we're talking about is speakeasies, blind tigers, blind pigs, roadhouses, and indeed, they were dangerous at times. And even though a lot of these stories are funny, but it did get dangerous for some of them. George Baxter of this back in the 1920s with the Bedford Police Department. In fact, in the hills of Back Creek in the Dittany Ridge area, where they were looking for blind tigers, back then, he found 5 men with guns all leveled on him. Whenever he got to this blind tiger, they must have known he was coming. They beat him with blackjacks and revolver butts. And they thought he was dead, but he survived it. But he never, none of these men were ever assailants, were ever brought to justice. He said, I didn't recognize them.
Yeah, it's easy to see why these places would, why so many women would be against these things, why the temperance movement started is, they blamed all the violence on everything wrong in their society. They would blame on the alcohol, everything. Now, see, the men there, and we mentioned this in the last show, the men always said that alcohol was essential, to the masculine spirit. It was essential to be a man, that it would help them. But the women, it wasn't for them. Women, they said alcohol would destroy motherhood. And you hear these stories and you think, boy, that was a rough crowd.
Yeah, it was rough, yeah. They had the reason to be upset.
We're just glad they all made it. A
lot of times that we can't believe it, we might believe it right ahead of time now. But there's no jobs for anybody, men or women.
Yeah.
And I know they sat there in my house, my folks, aunts and uncles, and older cousins, most of them was the grown people with family, and they'd play pinochle or something, maybe 2 or 3 days at a time, all night long, and they had home brew. Everybody made it, their own home brew. But I never seen one of them ever drunk.
Yeah.
They just sipped it like we'd drink a Coke or tea, lemonade, coffee. Yeah. Nobody had money to buy coffee.
Yeah.
You could buy 2 pounds of it at the JC stores. And if you bought it at the right time, they give you a jumping rope to the girls. And the boys, they got a Shirley Temple doll at Christmas time if they bought 2 pounds of coffee for so many times,
Wow.
Is that right?
And there was 4 JC stores in Bedford at the time.
My goodness.
Wow.
Well,
you remember them too?
Yeah.
I still
found
got
out.
my jumping rope.
Sorry. I found out that people, again, they were, and I want to make sure we get to more. You guys are full of stories, I can see, but people asked me what a revenuer was. Again, that was a federal agent that would come out. My guest next week will be Lee Hutchinson. His dad was a revenuer, and he's going to talk about that from that different time. But people ask about the stills, what they look like. We've got some pictures here that we're going to show you just real briefly before we get to the stories of Kenny and Jiggs here. But the first one there, that is a steam still. That's kind of in the back there, and you can see they are dismantling it. The probably revenuers got a hold of this and were dismantling it. They said people were talking about that you could find some of the stills a little bit later on if they had axe markings on it. They took the axe to it, and you could identify it by the axe marks. And so a steam still was one of the popular ones. The second one here is one that, and this was a big one. This one was an actual still, and they were using it for a teaching tool, but this was called a submarine still, a black pot submarine still, and you can see where they get that from the way that it kind of looks like a submarine there. And then the third one, this was a very popular one for many, many years too, called a turnip still. And this was used and for a lot of years as well. So there were others, but these were three real popular ones: the steam steel, submarine steel, and the turnip steel.
That one's like the one I had.
Okay.
I had it set up in the back of the barber shop.
Okay. The turnip steel.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
So you were familiar with that.
It was a smaller. It was more what they had. The more the poor people had, they didn't have the real big ones. They had this type, and it's easy to make because they make it out of copper and then run through copper tube. It had to go through copper tube to get it right, or it'd be poison. Yeah. So this is the real popular one that most of the bootleggers that come in the shop knew about.
Okay, the turnip steel. Okay, yeah. Good.
Now they was made some bigger and some smaller. What's that? About 10 gallon.
I was going to ask you about how many gallon. Could you tell about how many gallon this would have been?
A lot
about
of them said they had 20 or 30 gallon stills, and because there's a barrel of
part of it
mash.
So part of it would be underground. Yeah. You wouldn't see all of it up on top.
But see, they'd put a fire underneath it, and like when I was a boy, they could coming from Pinhook or Devil's Backbone, looking at the Dittany Ridge area, about the 4 mile strip, you can see little puffs of smoke.
Yeah.
And
now, how long would it take to fill up one of those 10 or 20 gallons? I mean, are you talking about, now I remember I was reading a story by Junior Johnson, the famed NASCAR driver, and he said moonshine was some of the hardest work he's ever done in his life.
His work.
And I couldn't find how long it would take. I mean, how long does it take to make a gallon of moonshine? I mean, are you talking hours? Or
according to what size still you had.
And how much heat, but you had to do it just
how
right.
Much sugar and how much corn you had.
Yeah, it was steam, and so the steam would come through and then it would drip into the drug. It would just actually drip. It was like a tea kettle steaming would come out of there. So you'd lose the moisture and you'd save the alcohol in the drip.
Right.
And so you set up a jug and it would drip in the jug till it got full and then put another jug there. But it would take quite a while.
That's what.
And you had to, if you got it, you couldn't get it to boil. You just want to come to a steam. They said.
You had to get that temperature just right to keep it
I
going.
never seen anyone run it at all. But after I got my still, they really educated me on it real fast how to do it. And the sheriff wouldn't let me run it off the batch. he said the state excise people will be here. It's illegal. I said, I just want to do it for show and have fun in history. And I didn't get to.
Yeah.
He said, as soon as you put a barrel of mash up, and I got the recipe for the mash and how to fix it. But he said, as soon as you get your barrel up, you're going to be arrested. So I didn't think I wanted to go to the hotel.
And now, by the way, it is legal to make. It is legal to make it. Not illegal. Not legal to sell it, right?
No.
Okay.
You can make homebrew or wine, but when you make liquor, that's a state revenue. It is illegal. Any moonshine whiskey is illegal. Now you can get special permits, but you have to go through the state excise and all that to get special permits, like for state fairs or something like that. But they have to put stuff in it that to make it poison and make sure that they dispose of it right.
Okay.
Liquor, moonshine or liquor they call it, was strictly illegal. That's what they told me.
Okay.
And
how many years ago was that, Kenny?
That was probably 70s, early 80s when I got my still.
He wouldn't let him make it.
In the 90s.
They wouldn't let you make it.
No.
Well, I know that they're making legal moonshine today, but they must be getting some kind of special permits or something, I guess.
No, if you make it for show, but you have to, in some way they put something in it to make it undrinkable. And it's got to be disposed right. It's under strict restrictions, so I didn't want to go through all that.
Yeah, I understand that.
A lot of these moonshiners, they had done this all their life legal in Tennessee and Kentucky border, where my people were at. They took 6 50-gallon to Nashville from where their home was at. And their still didn't look that big to me.
Wow.
But they took 6 mules to pull that whiskey. And 4 or 5 of the family.
300 gallons.
300 gallons.
Wow.
And they took it from Nashville. Well, they had the 6 mules that took to pull it in the mountains, and they had 4 or 5 of the families would take theirs. Others had maybe less or what, I don't know what the other, but I know what my family told me that they was taking. And when they would take it all the way down, they had to have armed guards to protect their whiskey. because that's the only thing they had coming the whole year.
And that's a
It's
lot
the
of money.
only thing. My people inherited 42,000 acres. They took part of West Virginia out of it. They're where the Dale Lakes Dam's at, the Elbe River. Well, my granddad come up with the idea to take his down with a barge to Nashville. And he said he had a lot of it sold before he got there. A lot of them said that he probably drunk
A little bit of a drunk.
But now he was a school teacher and a blacksmith.
Mm-hmm.
And but these are people that told me these things that was actually living that went through this with him.
Yeah.
And said that the revenuers would get after him and he'd just stop his mule and put the shoes on backwards and they couldn't track him.
Is that right?
Yeah. And they caught him one time, and they said if they caught these people back then, they caught him one time and put him in jail. But anyway, these same people told me and him, we went over and just took a team with good work horses and tied them to the jailhouse bars to pull the bars out, and they pulled the whole side of the jail out. So my granddad gets on the sheriff's horse, so they had him for horse stealing, and he takes off and goes clear to the other end of Tennessee over into Willow Springs, Missouri. And he had family that was over there. So as soon as he got there, he wrote a letter to the sheriff, told him he'd be back in so many days. He thought that was just for so many days, and then he could go back home. Well, the sheriff got on another horse, just went and got him and brought him back. I think he had to put 17 days in jail.
That's the first time in my life I've ever had somebody tell me a story that their grandpa sold the sheriff's horse. First time ever.
Yeah, I think so.
But they
I waited 42 years for that story.
but they told him, he told the sheriff that he was taking good care of old Blackie. I had a copy of the letter at one time.
Wow.
And, but it was so many different things there that they had done. And I know they made their whiskey right on the border in a cave. And he told that would have been my dad and his brothers and 2 sisters. They all come to Indiana later. But after they caught these people the second time, they caught them the third time, they would go to prison. They could sell their property or what went with it. So I can name 6 families that left the county where that my granddad lived, that lived here, and they were the first settlers here in Lawrence County, some of them. And that was all they made their living on, but is either that or go to prison. So they could come up here and work the quarries. None of them had an education. The guys that's my age, there's 5 of those brothers. I worked with 4 of them at Stark and Wetzel when I come back to World War II. They worked the day shift, and I worked nights. I never even knew they was on the job.
Wow.
And,
You know, whenever he was talking about prison, whenever they would put these guys, when they would give them their sentence, they would make their sentence a year and a day. Do you know why? If it was over a year, the county didn't have to house them, the state did.
Oh.
So they would make it a year and a day, so the state would have to foot the bill for holding revenuers for, But if it was a year, the county had to do it. So they give them a year and a day.
Well, there were a lot of, it got to be so in certain time periods, guys, I understand that there were just so many they were having, it became just monotonous, just trying to bring everybody up on charges, up on everything, because there was just so much of it.
Yeah. Can you tell us where you got your still, or did you make it?
Yeah, it came from Ohio originally. It was in Shipshewana, and I bought it at an auction. And I brought home my wife was really against it. And we were Christians, and we were trying to serve the Lord, but it was history, and it was part of my growing up when I was before I saved. And but too, so I bought it, and she wasn't. She come on and said, "Is that what I think it is?" I said, "That's moonshine still." "Well, what are you going to do with that?" I said, "I'm going to put it up in front of the barbershop." "Oh, no, it's wrong. Sending the wrong message. You know, we're trying to get people saved and get them out of this mess, you know." But
people, it would have made a conversation piece.
So what happened when I brought it home, I set it up in the Buddha there in the front of the garage. And so I set it up, and then I put that jug under it. And it really looked good. I had it on a little burner.
Yeah.
And so a guy went down the road and stopped at the Buddha store, and he said, "Hey, I saw a moonshine still." They said, no, not in Buda. He said, yeah, 5 houses up there on the left. He said, oh, they said, that's Dalton. He's liable to have anything. He thought, but Donnie Blakey was the deputy, and he passed there and seen it. Backed up. Well, I thought it was just a neighbor. I was changing the oil underneath my truck out on the driveway. And my wife did furniture, restored furniture in the garage right behind that, and she wasn't for it at all. And so he pulled up there and I heard this voice say, I'll get my chopping axe and take care of this. Well, I slid out and there was a cop car. And it's Donnie Blakey, was a deputy sheriff. And I said, what's wrong? He said, that's a moonshine still, that's illegal. I said, it belongs to that woman back there. And he said, oh, now Kenny. And I said, it belongs to that woman back there. That's all her antiques in there. She had the garage full.
Yeah.
And so my little grandson was about 4 years old. He come out there and he said, no, sir, officer, no, sir. It's Paps. But I said, no, he's just a little boy, officer. It all belongs to that woman. And by that time, Wanda was going in the house. So you're getting out of there. Yeah. And he said, no, sir, officer. Mimi don't even like that thing. It's all Paps. It's all his. So he told on me. But had a lot of fun, with the thing. And but I got it for history.
Yeah, that's a great part of our history.
Talk about it because basically, we got to look at it. Jiggs is right. They were poor. It was a Great Depression. Out in our area was 15, 20 miles at the most from Bedford. Nobody had a car, no electricity. Okay, very, very little education. So, and I'm not putting them down. It's part of our history. And so what could they do? They had a cornfield that had 20 or 30 gallons of alcohol in the corn. You'd go up the ridge. You'd say, well, he's got 30 or 40 gallon there. He'd look at the cornfield. They judge how much liquor he's going to have. And but it was there. It wasn't right. Well, but it was in their mind, I've got to feed my family. And, basically, alcohol does lead to poverty. We know that. There's and we've seen a lot of poverty, but we also seen what happened, and thank the Lord we come out of this era, and a few of them would get saved. They at the time they had tent revivals, and some traveling evangelists would come through the country, and when those bootleggers really got saved, they got saved. Yeah. They was fanatic one way, you might say, or extremist, but they would get extremists the other way. And the family growed up, and I know I was born in 39, so I was in that area all my life. And the ones that come out of that, almost all of them were prosperous. They come from nothing to something, and most of them amounted to something. The ones who stayed with bootlegging and didn't actually quit, a lot of those was the second, third generation, either blessing or curse, like the Bible said. But if we followed this, and you get to looking at the history, and some of them we talked before, that they were blessed. They come out of it. So it's a heritage, but yet I'm not necessarily saying it was good days. But the bootleggers were not bad people. We portray them in the movies and stuff as idiots and real evil. The roadhouse people wasn't the bootleggers, the ones that patronized. They was the city folks and stuff that go buy it. And that was the guys that was really giving the bootleggers a bad name, even though they were illegal. So it was just an era of time. And by having the still, you could reminisce, but you could also thank the Lord that we come out of that Great Depression as a country and as a people. And we did mount to something.
Well, if they were moonshiners, they knew how to work hard.
And we see now, we're seeing drugs and such as that is taking the place, but look at the toll it's taking. It's a lot worse. So, we really got to be concerned. And we really need to be praying for the country, because at least the bootleggers come out of it when prosperity came on. But now we've got prosperity, but we're getting into something a lot worse. And you could dry out from you after the red ring, from the the courtyard, that ring around your nose and your red nose on the end. After it got away, well, you got dried out a little bit. You was okay, but the drugs is such an addictive thing that. So we're seeing a lot of the same thing that our law enforcement is trying to
we
do
sure
today.
are.
Yeah.
Let me, Kenny, while I've got you here, I read this statement too about during the 30s that Harbaugh's Field, the airport. Do any of you remember that?
Harbaugh, when he out there on Inglewood,
Down there off Washington Avenue,
on
that
the
was
right where
Harbaugh
it calls,
Field there?
No.
yeah,
That one there?
No,
Where-
Hallville Airport's right where the Bedford Airport is on the Tunnelton Road.
Okay, well,
That
the
was
Grissom.
across the road was the Hardball Crusher. I mean,
yeah.
clear up to where Bill Kearns
Okay, so they
folks
moved
lived.
it out there then.
There was the Tommy Lavani farm.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And if you went down the hill, they had the Hardball Quarry there. And
Okay.
that was right across the road from my uncle, the Scoggins, who they took part of their ground for the airport landing field.
And they called it Harbaugh out there.
That was called
Yeah.
Harbaugh Field
Okay.
there. Okay. Well, I just read an account here where people that flew out of Harbaugh's Field near the wooded area where all these moonshiners were at, particularly in a kind of a triangle here of Leesville, Fort Ridner, and Tunnelton. Kind of in a triangle here, said that if they were flying low enough, they found out that there was bullet holes in the plane's wing, and more experienced pilots would say you should have known better than to fly low around that area.
That was Dittany Ridge. We was just in between all of them.
Okay. So, they said
Tunnel,
actual bullet holes, and they were shooting at
Yeah.
the planes to get them out of there, and they didn't fly over in that area.
They call them revenuers, you know.
Yeah, revenuers,
The revenuers they thought that's what they were doing.
Yeah.
Guys, we only have just a few more minutes, and these have been some great stories. So I'm going to give you just Kenny, you sat in people sat in your barber chair a lot, and they told you some stories. Can you told me one about a Huron situation. You don't have to name, but tell me that here just real quick before
one
we
in Huron?
leave. Yeah, the one in Huron.
Well, Private G.M. Wagner, and the reason I use his name, he was proud of it.
Yeah, okay.
He's gone now, but quite a character, and he got his from the war, private.
Yeah.
But he made moonshine down off Kings Ridge, down in that area.
That.
And so there's a branch or a spring, so they always had to have a spring or for fresh water for their fill their barrels. But he had a still on one side of the fence, and his neighbor had one on the other side, but they was using the same spring and branch coming down. Well, he sold his to the city hall, so they were his customers. So they would be protected. Well, one day he come home and his still was tore up, but the still across the fence wasn't. He went into the city hall and the mayor slapped him, and he'd tell the story over, and it was so because some of them backed it up. It's like, you'll never get another drop of liquor from me. Well, what's wrong, Jim? Well, you tore my still up. You let them tear my still up. No, they didn't get yours, and they named the other guy. They said, no, he got on the wrong side of the fence. they paid him to put his still back. So
Right. That's great.
I mean, it had to be true because they were just, of course, you got no private Jim. He was a dandy. He was a character.
And they paid it, but they put it still back.
Supposedly, they helped him put his still back because he was furnishing for the city. Another one, they brought it into the county jail. Now, I never know this. This was the stories. In a Coke truck. The Coke trucks lifted the doors up, ramp, and they go out toward Buda there. And the guy owned a big farm, and my father-in-law worked for him as a boy, but he didn't get to make the whiskey, or didn't. But they'd fill the Coke truck up, they'd take it to the county jail. There's a garage behind it, and the garage is still there. They'd back it in there, and that's where they would unload it. So it wasn't, we look at the bootleggers as, or the moonshiners as the bad people, but basically there was a whole lot of evil from the still on. And it wasn't necessarily the poor, uneducated as they try to really portray it, but it was the higher ups was really making the money because the bootlegger got very little, but then as it went through, about the same as drugs today, went through the channels.
That's a good point.
And that was where, so they, as long as you treat everybody right, but then they said around Leesville, Dittany Ridge area, the Ku Klux Klan come in. And it was to protect because they couldn't get it. And it was a pretty good organization to start with. Supposedly, and a lot of the good people joined the Klan so that they could control the area. Well, then some of the bootleggers got in it, so then they would go tear the other guy's still up so they could sell all of the alcohol. So it was just, it's no different. It was just.
I've read accounts of that they had to beware of the other competitor.
Yeah, but so the Ku Klux Klan helped them because they had this on there and they'd go tear up other people's steel and keep theirs. So now that's what they said really stopped a lot of the bootlegging.
I tell you, folks, there's been we're out of time, but there have been so many great stories, and I have a feeling that we could probably talk to these guys for another hour or two, but we just don't have the time. But we're going to do another show on this. This has been the second show of the history of moonshining in southern Indiana. My co-host Randy Greene, thank you, my friend. You've been good again. Kenny, thank you for all your great stories. Jiggs, thank you for your stories. Folks, we hope you enjoyed it. Be sure when you see these guys out, let them know that you appreciated their sharing with us today. You've been watching the Indiana History Project, the second show on moonshining. We'll have a third coming your way. I'm your host, Norm Taylor. Thank you for watching.